Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Monique, for the generous introduction as well as the invitation. We are delighted to be here. Before we start, we have to inform you about 3 clarifications or caveats or warnings, if you want, concerning our talk. Number 1. Our talk is not about Holocaust education, at least not as much as such. But we believe it will be helpful to draw connections with education about the Holocaust. Warning number 2. We are deeply pessimists about the role of schools, but our hopelessness is hopefully not paralyzing. And the 3rd warning, go back to our 2nd warning. Until all your hope is de-psychologized, this will become clearer by the end of our talk, so you have to be a little bit patient. What often passes for history education in our schools has little to do with history as a discipline and much more with the shaping of the many into the image of nation-state. The shaping involves the construction of an essentialized national identity supported by a no less essentialized and monolithic memory. In countries engaged in intractable conflicts, such as the ones we are coming from, Israel and Cyprus, shaping the identities of citizens through historical narratives, is an act of chimera in which facts are both absent and present. The inclusion or exclusion of particular narratives in the public sphere and in educational settings sets the stage for the tensions which characterize the relations between hegemonic and marginalized groups in traumatized societies. The purpose of our presentation today is not only to acknowledge the emotional and other complexities of teaching contested narratives and negotiating identity and memory, but also to offer some openings that deal productively with traumatic emotions. The openings have to do with the creation of alternative understandings of identity, trauma, and memory, understandings that are not bounded in the limitations imposed by methodological nationalism and by psychologized perspectives on trauma or traumatic events, such as the Holocaust. They also have to do with relocating learning out of the individual mind into the social sphere, raising it from the unavailable depth of the individual mind to the available surface of social interaction and social practice. And I believe Simone and Barbara yesterday were alluding to this along the same wavelength. Although transformations are not always achieved in the examples we offer today, it is important to reflect on both the failures and the successes of the efforts that are undertaken when providing opportunities to critically analyze contested narratives in classrooms where students and teachers are invited to inhabit renewed learning spaces and form alternative emotional communities.
By the way, just sorry for this, but our books have been found to be outstanding presents for bar mitzvah. So back to the serious stuff now. Yet before going into the examples, let us say something about the socio-political settings of the countries where we come from and do our research, Israel and Cyprus. Israel and Cyprus are 2 communities which have been involved or are still involved in violent conflict, the type known as intractable. In Cyprus, there is reduced violence with human casualties, and the segregation is less the outcome of recent violent displacement, but rather the result of historic conflict between Greeks and Turks. Palestinians and Jewish Israelis live in segregated areas, and tensions and violence persist. In Cyprus and Israel, the communities are defined mostly in ethnic, national, and political terms, and less so in religious terms, though things are changing. As for the context of our work, in Israel, we have conducted our research in the bilingual integrated schools, in which there are presently 6 serving approximately 1,100 Israeli, Palestinian, and Jewish students. In Cyprus, we have conducted our research in a few private and public multicultural schools where Greek, Cypriot, and Turkish-speaking students are educated together. In the schools, we have conducted qualitative and ethnographic studies for almost 12 years now. In them, we have gathered massive amounts of data, of which today we will introduce you to just 3 vignettes, showing the work of identity and history in these complex sites. We will do some comparative analysis juxtaposing evidence from the 2 sites to conceptualize how different aspects of identity are developed in practice. As for our theoretical and methodological underpinnings, we want you to know that we come from a philosophical and anthropological perspectives. We find it difficult, very, very, very difficult, to consider nouns such as conflict, Greek, Jew, or adjectives such as peaceful, violent, as true representations of the world. We strongly believe that social sciences should not assume that people are dead, nor should it help to choke them to death with categories that do not reveal the rich lives and struggles of all who appear to be alive. And in spite that we believe that we know that most of the social sciences keep doing that persistently. We may use these words for pragmatic reasons to be understood, but we well know that these words, these categories, are not qualities of individual minds, or just things out there, predetermined or final forms that are simply reachable or erasable, but becomings in the world raising from never-ending human interaction, evolving in historical contexts. Our ethnographic work engages with complexity, and doing so, it engages with context and noise, the same elements traditional psychological research and education tries to avoid. It recognizes the multiple complexities, political, social, emotional, that are present in processes of intergroup contact, which are immersed in multiple power relations that cannot be explained by simply attributing them to issues of culture and or identity, the great words, inventions of the social sciences. The process also involves abandoning the hope of finding fast solutions or writing praiseworthy bureaucratic reports. That's why we're usually in trouble with foundations. It involves acknowledging the intricacies of human interaction and networks, the intermittent nature of meaning making, and the necessary exuberance and efficiency of all transcription and translation.
Now we will present 2 examples, one from Israel and one from Cyprus, that show the emotional complexities encountered by teachers and students when dealing with contested narratives. The first example is based on a classroom activity in a bilingual school in Israel, and it addresses the death of Yasser Arafat, the past legendary president of the Palestinian Authority. The second example is based on a series of lessons on peaceful coexistence conducted by a high school teacher in a classroom comprised only of Greek Cypriots, but in a school in which Turkish Cypriots are also enrolled. We have selected these particular examples because they expose best and more clearly the emotional complexities involved in teaching about contested issues. Before describing the 2 examples, though, it is important to briefly outline some theoretical links among emotions, politics, and history teaching. Since the late 70s, scholars working in the area of emotions in different disciplines have developed sociocultural and political theories that challenge traditional biological and psychological approaches to emotions, thereby acknowledging the political dimension of emotional processes. Anthropologists such as Michel Lozarto, Catherine Latz, and Lila Abulukot, in particular, have argued that cultural and social phenomena are constitutive of emotions and affect the ways in which people feel, perceive, and conceptualize life events. On their view, emotions are public, not exclusively private objects of inquiry that are interactively embedded in power relations. This perspective historicizes, first, the ways in which emotions are constituted, second, their organization into discourses and technologies of power, and third, their importance as a site of social and spatial control through surveillance and self-policing. Consequently, it is important to pay attention to the contextual specificity of the transaction between larger social forces at the macro-political level and the internal psychic terrain of the individual, highlighting the ways that feelings are politicized in specific locales. Though emotions might also inhabit people's heads, so to speak, they are clearly in the world shaped, managed, and negotiated through human interactions and practices. Traumatic emotions, for example, for those who have not directly witnessed a traumatic event, are often defined through relations of power. Who has the power to decide who has been traumatized and who has not? Consider, for example, the growing discourse on second-generation Holocaust survivors, a discourse which might have little empirical substantiation but carries deep political, social, and economic repercussions. Acknowledging the historicization and politicization of emotions helps educators analyze and sort through various discourses about emotion and understand how those discourses operate to fabricate particular meanings about ethnicity that are circulated through certain practices, and not only ethnicity, of course. For example, historical narratives are unavoidably embedded in particular emotion discourses about collective national belonging and otherness. It is in this sense that it may be argued that teachers and students are always caught up in the politics of emotions. Emotions are legitimized or delegitimized not only on the basis of social relations in the classroom, but also in the context of larger historical narratives and power relations. It is worthwhile to investigate then the emotional struggles and challenges that take place among teachers, students, and the overarching historical narratives involved. And now to the first example.
You're getting two for the price of one. Now, the scenes we discuss took place during the first hour of the morning in the first grade after the death of Yasser Arafat, the president of the Palestinian Authority, back November 11, 2004, was announced. The political situation in Israel is organized in such a way that any conversation about Arafat's death in a classroom would be controversial at best. The history of the Palestinian-Jewish conflict offers both sides only antagonistic views and sad memories of this leader. Moreover, by 2004, little was left from the optimism that followed the signing of the Oslo Israeli-Palestinian peace accords in 1993. Since 2001, the Sharon Israeli government adopted a strategy based on the non-acknowledgement of the Palestinian leader as a valid interlocutor, and these steps truncated any attempts at negotiations. Though in late 2002 a new peace plan known as the Roadmap was accepted by both sides, tensions were not reduced, the conflict escalated, and Israel proceeded to build a security barrier with the aim of stopping any Palestinian extremists from attempting to enter Israel, an act condemned by the international community. Even in a school dedicated to crossing taboo boundaries, overcoming these limitations was not easy, especially when considering that Arafat's death came unannounced, and there was little time to prepare a commemoration, and it comes, of course, 5 days after the commemoration of Rabin's assassination. Yoda, the Jewish teacher, and Nuna, the Palestinian teacher, co-taught the class in which these events took place. In the first hour of school, and almost unexpectedly, Yoda introduced the topic of Arafat's death, emphasizing its emotional aspects. In her presentation, Yoda used an all-inclusive we, seemingly to create a sense of cohesion in the group. She introduced the subject indirectly, talking to Nuna, but not mentioning Arafat's name. Ah, Nuna, I know that this morning there is something a bit different the way we feel in yeah. When I was in my way to school, I heard over the news and wanted to speak a little bit about here in class. The children reacted by stating that they knew Arafat died. The first intervention by Nuna was one in which she tried to elicit information about who Arafat was. She said, "Who is this Arafat, Nakhla? Did everyone hear?" All the children heard that Yasser Arafat died. This statement was immediately followed by Yoda translating from Arabic to Hebrew and asking a similar question. Multiple contributions were offered by the children, creating some disorder. Sam, a Jewish child, seated in one of the front tables where Nuna was standing, said in a rather low voice, "I will spread shit in his grave." Nuna immediately picked up on this very strong, disrespectful comment. She approached Sam, placed her hand over his shoulder, asked him to calm down, and made a comment that set the rules for the conversation. Nuna said a very simple rule. Everything could be said as long as it was respectful. Shh, I need to stop for a while. I have no problem, each one and what he thinks, how he feels, what he feels. Sam, the most important thing is respect. Although simple, it was repeated in different ways a number of times, underlying the importance Nuna attached to this principle. Nuna's statement was supported by Yoda, the Jewish teacher, who joined her in repeating Nuna's full sentence in Hebrew. Also respect one to the other, and also respect to the persons we're speaking about. Nuna was fast to add that respect was something not necessarily related to the day's event, but a rule for all times. To us, to other children, to the world, with sentences of respect. What you said, turning to Sam, she said, "I will not repeat it," is something that also, when not connected to what happened today, is not acceptable to us in class. This last statement could be interpreted as one directed to the possibility that her previous statement might be misinterpreted as partial and dictated by the death of Arafat. Nuna wanted to make sure her statement was understood as free of political bias or national preferences. As a minority teacher, Nuna might feel the need to be careful. Also, as a teacher in an integrated bilingual school, Nuna needed to make sure her statement was not interpreted as one biased towards one of the groups represented. Defiant and showing again that his first utterance was not just a slip, Sam challenges Nuna's reference, saying, "Also if a rat that walks on the street dies?" For which he was once again strongly reprimanded by Nuna and asked to keep quiet by the Jewish co-teacher. The statement by Sam provoked laughter in the class, after which Nuna newly encouraged the children to speak about their feelings and thoughts regarding Arafat and his death. At some point, the conversation took an unpredicted turn. Some of the children brought up stories of death in their families. The death of a loved uncle or grandmother were mentioned. These were acknowledged by both Nuna and Yoda, who marked the utterances as belonging to the general sphere of death, seemingly different from the one discussed in class and dealt with the particular death of Arafat. Yoda said, "It is a bit different, the death of an uncle or a grandmother, for today we speak about a man all the world knew. He was the leader of the Palestinians," and Nuna added, "He was the leader of the people." This step could be interpreted as an attempt to redirect the conversation to its main course, and it seemed to be effective, because a Palestinian girl then mentioned her experience of watching television with her grandmother and how hearing about Arafat's death caused her grandmother to cry and reminded her of her husband's death. Nuna used this utterance to return to the fatherly figure theme she had commented on earlier. By referring to the child's grandmother's emotional reaction when her husband, the grandfather of the child, died, Nuna drew an analogy between Arafat and the grandfather. She represented Arafat as a fatherly figure for the Palestinian people, and things ended there.
Now to the second example. The scenes we discuss in the following example took place at an international private high school in 2008. In this school, both Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots are co-educated once again after the opening of checkpoints in 2003. Similar to what happens in Israel, the political situation in Cyprus is organized in such a way that any conversation about shared schooling between the two conflicting communities is controversial, to say the least. Since the time it was founded, this school accepted students from all communities of Cyprus. After the events of 1974, there were no Turkish Cypriots enrolled at this school. However, in September of 2003, a small number of Turkish Cypriot students from the north part of Cyprus were enrolled to the school. The enrollment of Turkish Cypriot students was encouraged and supported by the government of the Republic of Cyprus, aiming to revive the school's multi-communal character. Currently, Turkish Cypriot students constitute approximately 10% of the student body, while Greek Cypriot students are the majority at about 85%. A series of incidents against the presence of Turkish Cypriots at this school, such as graffiti on the walls, attack on some Turkish Cypriots by a right-wing youth group that violated the school premises, racist and nationalist slurs, led the school to seek effective ways how to integrate smoothly Turkish Cypriot students in the school. This effort, however, was not without reactions from many Greek Cypriot students, parents, and teachers. Chris, a religious instructor, is one of those teachers who decided to take initiatives and encourage peaceful coexistence and reconciliation among Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot students. Although the school's subject on religion is offered only to Greek Cypriots, there are no Turkish Cypriots in his classes. Chris taught a series of lessons about how religion, with particular emphasis to the Christian Orthodox faith adopted by the overwhelming majority of Greek Cypriots, contributes to peaceful coexistence and reconciliation. The student audience to which we refer below is constituted by 25 16 to 17-year-old Greek Cypriots. One of the lessons began with Chris showing a picture of Christ on the cross with his hands wide open and said, making the point that the nature of Christianity is purely intercultural. The verb to forgive in Greek, sichoro, means I come together with others. We are in a school where embracing the other is not defeat, but a step towards victory. Chris was clearly trying to make links to the presence of Turkish Cypriot students in their school. Minas, a 17-year-old boy, reacted almost immediately by saying that he would never reconcile with his Turkish Cypriot classmates as long as his mother was a refugee. As he explained, I wake up every day and I see the Turkish flag on the mountain, and you tell me to reconcile with the Turks? How can I abandon these feelings at home when I see them here in my own school? My mother is a refugee. At home, she talks about the home she once had and lost because of them. Living with the Turks is impossible. Minas' tone of voice was quite intense, and he was visibly upset. He referred to his Turkish Cypriot classmates indiscriminately as Turks, despite the subtle interventions from his teacher to make a distinction and refer to them as Turkish Cypriots. Chris then provoked his students to consider whether their Turkish Cypriot classmates could be held responsible for the Turkish invasion in Cyprus in 1974. Many students spoke and reiterated essentially that it was impossible to reconcile with them because they could not get out of their minds that their classmates had a Turkish origin. A few students expressed a different view, such as the idea is not to remain stuck in the past, said one student, but move forward. Another student stated, what is important is that we must look at the present and the future. We are here with Turkish Cypriots. We have to find ways to coexist with them. Is it their fault because some fanatics from their side did what they did? Didn't some fanatics from our side commit similar atrocities to innocent Turkish Cypriot women and children? Then Minas again intervened in a seemingly emotional tone. Are you guys serious? Whatever we did it as defense against Turkish aggression. What you're saying about killing innocent people is leftist propaganda, which is the same as Turkish propaganda. We are Greeks. We are not barbarians. We don't just kill people for no reason. I read it again. We don't just kill people for no reason. When you hear lies such as this, it is not surprising that we'll never become friends with them. Chris and some students seemed a bit surprised at Minas' outburst. Some students repeated that they did not want to accept Turkish Cypriots as equal and reconcile with them because of the past trauma and suffering and the unresolved political problem. Some of the students' responses show the strong emotions, anger, resentment, feeling of injustice, and how those are very much aligned with hegemonic narratives. For example, two students emphasized that they felt a debt towards their ancestors not to forget Turkish atrocities and used this argument as a justification why coexistence and reconciliation with their Turkish Cypriot classmates was unacceptable. One student said, we do not want to forget. We have a debt to our ancestors not to forget what the Turks did to us, so coexistence is out of the question. All those atrocities they did to us, should we just dismiss them? Another student reiterated that we know the kind of barbaric group the Turks have been throughout history. Nothing will change that. I do not understand why they were brought to a Greek school. At the same time, it is interesting how other students acknowledged the socialization processes they have gone through their schooling and admitted that it was difficult or unacceptable to forget past learning. For instance, one student stated, is it our fault that in history we are told all the bad things about the Turks? Naturally, this is what we know about them. It is difficult to change these beliefs. Similarly, another student pointed out angrily, this is what we have been learning all these years. What, now we are going to change history? They have wronged us and now we are going to become friends with them simply because they attend our school?
How many of you think the Greek children are right? The above examples, though presenting different challenges, reveal the emotional complexities encountered by teachers and students when dealing with conflicting historical narratives in schools. As it has been argued, cultural and social phenomena are constitutive of emotions and affect the ways in which people feel, perceive, and conceptualize life events. In the context of the two examples, one can easily identify emotions at work in educational settings. Emotions are present, activated, and played out in all interactions taking place in the classrooms, even more so in settings in which much is at stake. In both of the examples, the individual almost disappears and groups take their place. This seems to be the main struggle that is taking place, that is, the tension between individual feelings and emotions of collective belonging. In the example from Israel, while the adult teachers choose to discuss or highlight the overarching units of peoplehood nation, the children point to more personal experiences related to their individual narratives. In the example from Cyprus, while the religious instructor wants to overcome fixation on national identity, the Greek Cypriot adolescents point to emotional experiences that reified the hegemonic narratives. It is possible, then, that when children are strongly socialized with hegemonic narratives, these narratives become prominent in their lives. What emotions, then, are legitimized and delegitimized in the two examples we narrated? In the example from Cyprus, the legitimized emotions are the ones that convey the trauma and ongoing feelings of injustice suffered by the Greek Cypriot community. Despite the teacher's intervention, the students seem unable to look at their negative emotions from another perspective. It is not that feelings of peace and reconciliation are delegitimized altogether, but the hegemonic emotional culture and the society, nation, and the school cannot be easily interrupted. In the example from Israel, on the other hand, two types of children's emotions are delegitimized. First, the Jewish child's emotional expression that are considered disrespectful of the occasion. This is interesting in itself, for the child who claims to spread shit on Arafat's grave is clearly expressing emotions that strongly relate to the legitimate sphere in the discussion, as said by the teachers, of the macro-social, the public, the national level. This child seems to be well aware of what he's doing and challenges several times the teacher's efforts to quiet him. As you may remember, he compares Arafat to a rat. One can say that he is the only child that, in a sense, speaks the language of the teachers, challenging them and playing with their emotions. What seems to trigger the delegitimization of this child's emotion is not the sphere in which they are positioned, but the color with which they seem to try to tint this sphere. Yet almost all other children who are respectful raise individual emotional experiences of mourning, the second type of children's emotions that are, to say the least, not legitimized enough. The other children clearly know some things about Arafat, but if the death of Arafat is on the floor, it is from their perspective more the death than Arafat himself that needs to be attended to. What is central again in the politics of emotion in the classroom is the fact that children's stories are allowed for little or no space in the classroom event. Children's emotions about their own personal mourning experiences are delegitimized because they seem to be considered irrelevant by the teachers. The emotional climate in the classroom, as said by the teachers, is so keen to the political aspects of the emotions around Arafat's death that children's personal experiences are undermined. What is being reinforced in terms of power relations is not totally clear because there are two levels that work in parallel. It could be the power of teachers as teachers to set the rules, but it could also be the power of the nation over the individual inscribed through the teacher's denial of space for individual emotional experiences. The differences between the examples from Cyprus and Israel show that nothing can be predetermined, though. At times it is the students and at times it is the teachers, the ones doing the job of the hegemony. This is one more reason to seriously take the fact that things are indeed complex.
Our ethnographic research in Cyprus and Israel over the last 12 years has taught us how teachers and students remain firmly emotionally rooted in the hegemonic narratives of their own community. It has also taught us to be attentive at how emotions are produced and performed and to what they are used for. While the emotions of trauma are very real, we argue that educators can work toward peace-building, healing, and reconciliation through devising critical pedagogies that do not remain stuck in a foundational, essentializing discourse which sets trauma and emotions in the minds of individuals while hiding their performative social nature or stay too firmly grounded in a dualistic thinking, we the good, they the evil, that sets up hierarchies, oppression, inequality, and exclusion, while taking a simplistic, one-sided approach solution which denies complexity. Jonathan Jansen, writing in the context of post-apartheid South Africa, argues that critical theory and pedagogy is severely limited for making sense of the troubled knowledge of a traumatized past, for it receives and constructs the world as divided, black, white, oppressors, oppressed, and then takes sides to free the oppressed, the marginalized. Yet the challenge in traumatized communities is often how to deal with the student who resists or rejects critical perspectives and who openly expresses racist, anti-Semitic, or nationalist views because his or her materials and or symbolic privileges are being threatened or lost. Or the student who is so traumatized from racism or nationalism and feels that nothing can be done to rectify the situation. A basic premise of critical pedagogy in post-traumatic context should not be simply to question the dominant educational arrangements, curricula, textbooks, pedagogies. It should also be, and I quote Jansen, the people there, the bodies in the classroom who carry knowledge within themselves that must be engaged, interrupted, and transformed. End of quote. And the ways this knowledge is produced and put to use within political contexts such as the nation state. These bodies and their troubled knowledge constitute the starting point for critical pedagogy in this context. Thus, taking sides early on based on justice and democracy ideas, maintains Jansen, may not be such a wise move when there is clash of embodied knowledges and memories. We want to extend Jansen's analysis by emphasizing in particular the role of critical pedagogy in highlighting those practices through which certain emotions and knowledges become of most worth, and how traumatized students and teachers might construct more quote-unquote safe classroom spaces within which the wounded of all sides can engage in critical and productive dialogue. By choosing to adopt a critical pedagogical lens that examines the emotional complexities of contested knowledges, the teacher is committed to interrogate how received knowledges and reconstructed emotions underlie structures of feeling in the teaching of various narratives without adopting a self-righteous or a therapeutic perspective. This suggests, for example, that traumatic experiences such as the Holocaust should not, quote-unquote, become a, quote-unquote, problem of feelings demanding a psychologized approach of healing. We all know the Holocaust can become a serious subject of human care as much as a political tool through which to try and benefit from the world. The process of dissolving categorizations of us and them is a matter of observing very carefully the consequences of the underlying ideological and emotional attachments of the pedagogies that are being implemented. These attachments need to be engaged and interrupted in both sensitive and critical ways. Zvi?
Rwanda might be more in need of structural help and change than in traumatic support. Anyway, conclusions. There. Engaging with trauma in educational context is not an easy task. Our argument essentially seeks to imagine small openings in enacting pedagogies and renewed affective relations grounded in solidarity and social justice. Trauma and suffering educate emotion and often inculcate violent affective relations with oneself, others, and the world. Families, workplaces, and schools constitute particular pedagogies of emotion. That is, they are social and political mechanisms for educating emotion. Hence, we are schooled to express, talk about and use emotion in certain ways that strengthen and perpetuate inclusion-exclusion and ask them binaries. A major assumption made here is that emotions both enable and disable transformations of oneself, other, and the world. The interesting issue is not about whether pedagogies of emotion might make a difference in overcoming structures of subordination, violence, and the politics of trauma. It is all too well known that even radical pedagogical trajectories often become territorialized and lose their radicality. Instead, educators and students must pursue singular ethical and political responses to the contextual demands of each challenge. Following Nicholas Rose, we argue, therefore, that a fundamental task of education is to help maximize the capacity of educators and students, both individually and collectively, to reconfigure the practices that govern them in the name of their nature, their freedom, and their identity, revealing the lies, falsehoods, deceptions, and self-deceptions which are inherent within these attempts to govern us for our own good. How do we do that? Well, we could start by not engaging, first, in the foundational, essentializing discourse which sets trauma and emotions in the minds of individuals while hiding their performative social nature in the context of nation-state. And second, and clearly not less important, by not engaging in a dualistic thinking, we the good and they the evil, that sets up hierarchies, oppression, inequality, and exclusion, while taking a simplistic one-side approach solution which denies complexity. If the social sciences, as I hope we all agree, have the responsibility not only to understand the world, but to try to change it in some way. So maybe our most central suggestion is to be tremendously careful not to become the main implementers of the ideology of nation-state by trying to give up on methodological nationalism that we all sin with. Second, we should try, of course, to get rid of psychological, solipsistic, mental discourses and representations that only reinforce the type of things we're trying to deal with. Doing the things, we can only hope that they may work to inspire different lines of flight, as the Luz would have it, even if the small openings that are produced have momentarily limited success. We thank you very much for your attention. We won't answer together. Just don't worry.
Now we have the time for 3 questions.
If not, we get a longer break.
Thanks a lot for this very, very interesting presentation. In fact, I have 2 questions. Mostly your study is on the formal education system. And I would like to know if you have any element regarding non-formal education. Because in one moment, I guess it was in the Israeli case, you mentioned the fact that the teacher is a civil servant, that he has some responsibility. So obviously in a non-formal setting, this heavy weight will be out of the exercise. So that is my first question. The second question is regarding when you said this kind of it's a little bit difficult in English, depsycholization, so where in fact it's I have a question here, understanding what you mean, but at the same time, don't you believe that to take count also on the psychological element on this is a tool to reach exactly what you want to do in terms of understanding? So mostly because at the end of the day, the individual emotion you can say it's also a universal value. So if I'm able to understand that the emotion that you go through is an emotion that potentially I can go through, it can help to have a dialogue.
A serious answer would be a little bit longer, but we'll do it short. Regarding non-formal education, I think that in many ways I agree that non-formal settings offer sometimes better opportunities. But let us not forget that, as we've shown in our own example, things can go in any direction. Also in informal education, the same would be true. So that's the short answer for the first. For the second one, we are writing right now on an attempt to de-psychologize education. We think it's the worst thing that has happened to education, to be dominated by psychology. A process which is tremendously new, totally responsible, and it ends up killing 50% of the student population. And we don't like that. I mean, sorry. But our problem is not psychology itself. Our problem is the metaphors that different realms of knowledge create about what is it that education is all about. Now, when you think in terms of education as mental processes, what wrongly is called by psychologists that seem at times not even to understand Greek, they call it cognition, okay? So then you're in trouble because you're pointing and trying to work with that which is unavailable to you. Now, life is about availability. Okay, we are bodies working in the world, and we should try to create educational metaphors that allow us to work with them and the totality of what they have to offer. That's the second short question. Sorry, that's the second short answer. I don't know if Michalinos want to add anything, but
no, just a clarification. We have nothing against psychologists. We are actually working with many psychologists. Some of our best friends are psychologists. So it's against the so much, and we are not the only ones, of course. Nicholas Rose has written a lot about de-psychologization, and there is actually a revival of work in different disciplines with the ontological turn to actually de-psychologize some of the metaphors and some of the ways of the discourses that we use. So it's not against the discipline itself, it's against some of the ways we use some of the disciplines, and we could say the same thing about education and other disciplines. Forgetting, materialization, forgetting the ontology, and focusing so much on the epistemology. And so that is what we are actually critiquing. It's not the psychologists. We love psychologists.
Thank you for the fascinating presentation. I would like to know, can you discern any trend? You mentioned, Zvi, that in Israel there are 6 such schools. Does that represent any trend? Is there an increase? And what is how is the experiment viewed by the majority population? And in Cyprus, do I understand that there's only one such experiment?
Well, actually, we don't have the type of integrated schooling that Israel has. The closest that the term that I use in the context of Cyprus is mixed schools, where there are like 1 or 2 schools where there are both Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots, but there is the percentage is so vastly different. The overwhelming majority are Greek Cypriots, so you cannot really talk about either integrated schooling or shared schooling. Well, shared schooling is kind of a new idea that has been popping up in several regions now, including Cyprus, and there are undergoing efforts to bring together schools Greek Cypriot schools and Turkish Cypriot schools in the following the format of Northern Ireland's shared schools, where they come together for a subject, physics or other subjects, realizing that they cannot have the integrated schooling that many people would like to have for various reasons, but they are uncomfortable with that idea of complete separation. So it's kind of in a middle way, but we are at the very, very beginning, point almost zero.
Regarding the situation in Israel, since 1984, when the first integrated school was created in the integrated village of Neve Shalom, that was the first attempt. Then 1998, the second school is open by a NGO that is led by a Palestinian Israeli and a Jewish American Israeli. Now, they are very special schools, and like any special schools, they don't belong to the poor. That's the first thing we should keep in mind. They belong to the middle upper classes, because being intelligent has a lot to do with money. Now, if they have a chance of developing, I think we'll see more of them in Israel. They're used for political reasons as well. Okay, they're very helpful in doing good propaganda. And I think that they have what to contribute, because they do represent a voice that I would like personally to see represented in Israel, which is a voice that says that separation is not a necessity. Okay. Now, but you have to keep in mind that in Israel, what is being developed now within the Ministry of Education is the second type of attempt that is similar to the one that was developed in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland started their integrated education 2 years before Israel. I think the beginning in Israel has to do with what happened in Northern Ireland. And the new attempt in Northern Ireland that are competing approaches, one is integrated and the other one is called shared education, in which they try to bring schools that are segregated, Catholic and Protestant, for example, together for certain periods of time or to study jointly certain subjects. Now, the geography and demography of Northern Ireland allows that to be done with ease. Israel's demography and geography are a little bit different, and still places like Lod and Ramla are starting to implement shared education programs. And by the way, the subtitle of one of our books is "What Happens to Children When Adults Find Solutions to Problems They Do Not Have."
Thank you very much for the theory, but very much specifically, I'm over here, for the two case studies, because they will stick in my mind, I know, for a long time. Now I'm wondering whether you could give a case study, one or two of the small openings that are in your concluding remarks, because I haven't picked those up. Maybe I missed it, but I'd love a clear example of a small opening that you've seen in the classroom you've been in, or the teachers you've worked with.
Excellent observation. Well, due to the lack of time, we mentioned initially 3 examples, and we wanted to have like a third example that would demonstrate more the openings. We do have those examples, and these are the examples. Despite that Zvi doesn't like the word hope, you notice that the last sentence includes that word. And that actually is connected with small openings where teachers, and we have examples of those in our ethnographic studies, where teachers over a long period of time, when certain conditions are met, like they are developing a trustful relationship with the kids, they are able to talk about controversial issues, sensitive issues, in ways that open up possibilities that were unimaginable before, like talking about the issue. From Cyprus, I can tell you about the issue of missing persons. Missing persons not only from one side, but missing persons of the other side. For a long time, and it's still a taboo issue, this is not talked about in schools. Only a few teachers have dared to touch on the issue of missing persons from both sides. Usually, the hegemonic narrative of the Greek Cypriot side is, we only have missing persons. We are the only side who suffered. And our number of missing persons is a lot greater than the number of missing persons of the Turkish Cypriot side. But actually bringing survivors or relatives of missing persons in classrooms used to be a known phenomenon. Now you can find, and we document cases where kids, elementary school kids, can actually engage in very respectful and sensitive conversations with relatives of missing persons without ending up being another reproduction of the hegemonic narrative. We suffered, we are the victims, they are the perpetrators, end of the story. So there is mutual acknowledgement and mutual understanding that is being built up. But there are certain conditions, and we talk about them in the book with Zvi, and this is one example.
We have 3 minutes left. I'll give you an example of Israel that has to do with non-intervening in what children say, not stopping them from speaking. Okay, those are tremendously important moments that at these issues teachers find it tremendously difficult to do, not because they're stupid, but because they realize very well in what type of political context they live and the dangers that are around them, okay, and what puts them to work in the ways they work. They're clearly not unable to do it otherwise. And when they do it, and the example, for example, of not reacting to jokes of children in which they express border crossing, okay, or when they purposely lie about who they are just to make fun of the adults that always want to imprison them in their imagined identities. Okay, those are fantastic moments. In the book, we developed the idea of trying, first of all, to truly pay attention to children. Children are tremendously intelligent, and schools seem to forget that. Okay, so we try to teach them, and that's a pity, because in the way we lose fantastic ideas of how to organize the world differently than the way we organize it. Okay, these young children have tremendously good ideas. Okay, they don't pay attention to some differences we pay attention. At times they pay attention to other differences that seem to me much more easy to meet the needs of getting along together. Okay, that's one thing. The other thing that we emphasize is that we should allow children to develop the natural things that they have. And what children have as natural is that they're all little anthropologists. They walk around the world uncovering it, and they know about it everything. Then we teach them to lie about that. So if you pay attention to children, you let them talk their knowledge, their learning, and you engage that learning critically, in a sense, I think that much can be done. And we'll have it could happen that we'll end up having a couple of happy children in school.
Thank you very much for this great opening of our conference today. I think it was an excellent start. Thank you again.
Thank you very much.